Chapter 3. Rex Ltd. was one of the oldest and best-known luxury shops in Yokohama's swank Motomachi district. Since her husband's death, Fusako had been running the business by herself. The Moorish architecture of the small two-story building was distinctive. The mosque window, set into the thick white wall at the front of the shop, always contained a tasteful display. Inside, an open mezzanine, much like a veranda, overlooked a patio of imported Spanish tile. A small fountain bubbled in the center of the patio. A bronze Bacchus, some Vivax neckties carelessly draped over its arms, was one of the many curios collected by Fusako's husband before his death. These were priced so as to discourage any would-be buyer. Fusako employed an elderly manager and 4 salesgirls. Among the clientele were wealthy foreigners who lived in Yokohama, a large number of dandies and movie people from Tokyo, and even some buyers from small retail shops on the Ginza who came down to forage. Rex enjoyed a reputation for uncanny discernment of fine quality, particularly in imported menswear and accessories. Both Fusako and the manager, a man called Shibuya, who possessed her husband's tastes, were scrupulous buyers. Whenever a ship docked in Yokohama, an import agent who was an old friend of the family used his connections to get them into the bonded warehouse as soon as the cargo had been unloaded. Often Fusako was able to place a bid before other buyers had seen the shipment. Her policy was to emphasize quality labels while providing a wide price range in every item. Rex's order for Jaeger sweaters, for example, would be divided equally between the manufacturer's most exclusive and more modest lines. The same was true of imported Italian leather. Rex's selection included leather from the tanning school attached to the Chiesa Santa Croce in Florence, as well as the most expensive gloves and purses from the Via Condotti. Though Fusako was unable to travel abroad herself because of Noboru, she had sent Mr. Shibuya on a buying trip to Europe the year before, and he had established new connections all over the continent. Shibuya had devoted his life to elegance in dress. Rex even stocked English spats, an article not to be found in any of the Ginza shops. Fusako reached the shop at the usual time and was greeted with the usual morning cordiality. She asked a few business questions and then went up to her office on the mezzanine and opened the day's mail. The air conditioner in the window whirred solemnly. Being able to sit at her desk at the usual time was a great relief. It had to be this way. Today of all days, she couldn't imagine what might have happened if she had stayed home from work. She took a lady's cigarette from her purse and glanced as she lit it at the memo book on her desk. Yuriko Kasuga, a movie actress in Yokohama on location, was due to arrive at noon for some colossal shopping. She had just returned from a film festival in Europe and, having spent all her gift money on other things, hoped to cover up with presents from Rex. Some stunning French accessories, she had telephoned to say, for about 20 men. Pick out whatever you like. Later in the afternoon, a private secretary from Yokohama Importers was coming over to pick up some of the Italian polo shirts her boss, the company president, wore on the golf links. Faithful customers, these women were remarkably easy to please. A part of the patio was visible beneath the louvered swinging doors. It was hushed. The tips of leaves on a rubber tree in one corner shone with a dull luster. Apparently, no one had arrived yet. Fusako was worried that Mr. Shibuya might have noticed what felt to her like a flush around her eyes. The old man looked at a woman, as though he were examining a piece of fabric in his hand. Even if she was his employer. She had never actually counted until that morning, 5 years since her husband's death. It hadn't seemed so long in passing, but all of a sudden, like a white obi she would never be able to wind up, 5 years was a dizzying length. Fusako teased the ashtray with her cigarette and then snuffed it out. The man still nested in every nook of her body. She was aware of her flesh beneath the clothes as continuous thigh and breast in warm accordance. It was a new sensation, and she could still smell the sweat of the man. As if to test them, she curled her stockinged toes. Fusako had met Ryuji for the first time 2 days before. Noboru, who was a fanatic about ships, had wheedled her into asking a shipping executive friend for a letter of introduction, and they had gone to see the Rakuyo, a 10,000-ton freighter anchored at Takashima Pier. Stopping for a minute at the far end of the dock, mother and son gazed at the cream and green-colored ship gleaming in the distance. Fusako unfurled a parasol with a long, white snakeskin handle. "You see those ships out in the offing?" Noboru said knowingly. "They're all waiting their turn for a berth to open up." "That's why our shipments are always so late getting in," Fusako drawled. She felt hot just looking up at the ship. The cloud-dappled sky was partitioned by an intricate crisscross of hawsers, and lifting up at it in reverence like a slender chin was the Rakuyo's prow, limitlessly high, the green banner of the fleet fluttering at its crest. The anchor clung to the hawse hole like a large metal black crab. "This is going to be great," Noboru said, brimming over with boyish excitement. "I guess we'll be able to look her over fore and aft. Let's not expect too much, dear, until we're certain this letter is what we need." Thinking about it later, Fusako realized that she had felt her heart begin to dance, even as they had stood looking up at the ship. "That's funny. I'm just as excited as Noboru." The feeling beset her at the height of her languor. Just lifting her head was a hot and wearisome chore, suddenly and for no reason. "She's a flush deck, Mom. Looks like a pretty good ship, all right." Unable to contain the knowledge that crowded his brain, Noboru held forth to his disinterested mother. As they drew closer, the Rakuyo swelled before them like great music. Noboru sprinted ahead and raced up the glittering silvery gangplank. But Fusako had to wander down the corridor in front of the officers' quarters, helplessly clutching her letter to the captain. The decks, where unloading was in progress, were bustling and noisy, but the stuffy corridor was unpleasantly hushed. Then a cabin door marked "Second Officer" opened, and Tsukazaki appeared. "Can you tell me where I might find the captain?" "He's not here now. Can I help you?" Fusako showed him the letter. Noboru, eyes shining, gaped up at the sailor. "I see, a kind of study trip. I suppose I can show you around." His manner was brusque. His gaze never left her face as he spoke. That was their first encounter. She would never forget his eyes as he confronted her in the corridor. Deep set in the disgruntled, swarthy face, they sought her out as though she were a tiny spot on the horizon, the first sign of a distant ship. That, at least, was the feeling she had. Eyes viewing an object so near had no business piercing that way, focusing so sharply. Without leagues of sea between them, it was unnatural. She wondered if all eyes that endlessly scanned the horizon were that way. Unlooked-for signs of a ship descried, misgivings and delight, wariness and expectation. The sighted vessel just barely able to forgive the affront because of the vast reach of sea between them. A ravaging gaze. The sailor's eyes made her shudder. Tsukazaki took them to the bridge first. The ladder they climbed to the main deck was obliquely runged with bars of summer sunlight. Indicating the freighters anchored offshore, Noboru repeated his knowing observation. "I guess all those ships are waiting their turn for a berth." "Right you are, Sonny. Some of them may have to wait out there 4 or 5 days." "Do they notify you on the wireless when a berth opens?" "Right again. You get a cable from the company. There's a committee that meets every day to decide berth priorities." Sweat was dappling Tsukazaki's white shirt with little spots, which revealed the flesh of his powerful back. Fusako was disconcerted. She was grateful to the man for taking Noboru seriously, but he made her uncomfortable when he turned to her and asked direct questions. The boy knows what he's talking about. Does he want to be a sailor? His eyes probed her again. He seemed a rugged, simple man, yet there was also about him an air of indifference, and Fusako couldn't determine whether he felt any professional pride. When, opening her parasol against the sun and peering narrowly up at his face, she tried to decide, she thought she discovered something unexpected in the shadow of his heavy brows, something she had never seen in the broad light of day. He'd be smart to forget about it if he is. This is a miserable business, if ever there was one, Tsukazaki said, not bothering to wait for her answer. Over here, Sonny. This is a mounted sextant. The instrument he slapped looked like a white mushroom on a long stem. When they went into the pilot house, Noboru wanted to touch everything. The speaking tube to the engine room and the automatic pilot gyro, radar screens, the electronic channel selector. The indicator reading stop, stand by, ahead, and countless other gauges and dials seemed to summon visions of peril on the open sea. In the chart room next door, he gaped at shelves stacked with maps and tables and studied an erasure-smudged chart still in the drafting. The chart laced the sea with capricious lines which appeared and reappeared according to some curious ungeometry. Most fascinating of all was the daily log. Sunrise and sunset were entered as small half-circles. A pair of golden horns marked the passage of the moon, and the ebb and surge of the tides were shown in gentle, rippling curves. While Noboru wandered through private dreams, Tsukazaki stood at Fusako's side, and the heat of his body in the sultry chart room was beginning to oppress her. When the parasol she had leaned against a desk clattered suddenly to the floor, she felt as if she herself, fainting, had fallen. She raised a little cry. The parasol had glanced off her foot. The sailor stooped immediately and picked it up. To Fusako, he seemed to move as slowly as a diver underwater. He retrieved the parasol, and then, from the bottom of this sea of breathless time, his white cap rose slowly toward the surface. Shibuya pushed through the louvered office doors and announced, "Yoriko Kasuga has just arrived." "All right, I'll be right down." The old man had revived her too abruptly. She regretted her tinny reflex reply. She studied her face for a minute in a mirror hanging on the wall. She felt as if she were still standing in the chart room. Yoriko was in the patio with one of her ladies-in-waiting. She was wearing a huge sunflower of a hat. "I want Mama to do all the choosing. I'm just helpless." Fusako objected to being called Mama, as though she were the proprietress of a bar. She descended the stairs slowly and walked over to where Yoriko stood chatting. "And how are you today? It certainly is hot again." The actress complained about the devastating heat and the crowds at the pier where they were filming. Fusako pictured Ryuji somewhere in the throng, and her spirits flagged. 30 cuts this morning. Can you imagine that? That's what Mr. Honda calls racing through a picture. Will the film be good? Not a chance, but it's not the kind of picture that takes prizes anyway. Winning a Best Actress award had become an obsession with Yoriko. In fact, the gift she was buying today constituted one of her inimitable gestures toward the awards jury. Her willingness to believe any scandal, except one involving herself, suggested that she would proffer her body to every member of the jury without hesitation, if she thought that might help. Though she managed with difficulty to support a family of 10, Yoriko was a gullible beauty and, as Fusako well knew, a very lonely woman. Still, except that she was a good customer, Fusako found her fairly intolerable. But today Fusako was enveloped in paralyzing gentleness. Yoriko's flaws and her vulgarity were apparent as always, but they seemed as cool and inoffensive as goldfish swimming in a fishbowl. At first I thought sweaters might be nice since it's almost fall. But these are supposed to be things you bought this summer, so I picked out some Calden ties and some polo shirts and a few Jif pens. For the wives, I don't think you can go wrong with perfume. Shall we go upstairs? I have everything together in the office. I'd love to, but I just don't have time. I'll just barely be able to work in a bite of lunch as it is now. Can I leave everything up to you? The important things are the boxes and wrapping. They're the reality of a gift, don't you think? We'll package everything beautifully. The secretary from Yokohama Importers arrived just as Yoriko was leaving, and she was the last regular customer for the day. Fusako had the sandwich and cup of tea she ordered every day from a coffee shop across the street, brought up to her office and sat down in front of the tray alone again. Arranging herself comfortably in the chair, like a sleeper burrowing under the covers in an attempt to recapture an interrupted dream, she closed her eyes and returned effortlessly to the bridge of the Rakuyo. Tsukazaki led them down flights of stairs to the boat deck, from where they could watch cargo being raised from the number 4 hold. The hatch was a large, dark fissure in the steel plates of the deck at their feet. A man in a yellow steel helmet standing on a narrow ledge just below them was directing the crane with hand signals. The half-naked bodies of stevedores glistened dully in the dusk at the bottom of the hold. The cargo first took the sun when it was hoisted, wobbling up from the bottom, high into the mouth of the hatch. Slats of sunlight slipped nimbly over the crates as they wheeled through the air, but faster even than the shattered light the cargo sped and was hovering above the waiting barge. The terrifyingly deliberate prelude and the sudden, reckless flight. The dangerous glitter of silver and a twist of fraying cable. Standing under her open parasol, Fusako watched it all. She felt load after heavy load of freight being lifted from her and whisked away on the powerful arm of a crane. Suddenly, but after long and careful preparation. She thrilled to the sight of cargo no man could move, winging lightly into the sky. And she could have watched forever. This may have been a fitting destiny for cargo, but the marvel was also an indignity. It keeps getting emptier and emptier, she thought. The advance was relentless, yet there was time for hesitation and languor. Time so hot and long it made you faint, sluggish, congested time. She must have spoken then. It's been so kind of you to show us around when I know you must be very busy. I was wondering if you're free tomorrow evening, perhaps we could have dinner together. It was a sociable invitation, and no doubt Fusako spoke the words coolly. To Tsukazaki's ear, it sounded like the babbling of a woman stricken with the heat. He looked at her with perfectly honest, puzzled eyes. The night before, they had gone to the new Grand Hotel for dinner. I was still just trying to thank him then. He ate so properly, just like an officer. That long walk after dinner. He said he'd walk me home, but we got to the new park on the hill and didn't feel like saying goodnight yet. So we sat down on a park bench. Then we had a long talk. Just rambled on about all kinds of things. I've never talked so much with a man before. Not since my husband died.